I actually identify pretty strongly with Chris McCandless, however hubristic and misguided he was. He followed his heart and his idealistic romanticization of nature, and it's hard not to have a certain respect for his faith and his beliefs. I actually find a lot of his philosophy very Taoist.
If I have learned, really have learned from the water, if I understand the meaning of such a quote from Tao Te Ching, so you will behave like water. Just go with flow. Go with flow. Life is always beautiful. If you go with flow, you will feel life is actually always beautiful as it is.
Joy is in everything and anything we might experience. We just have to have the courage to turn against our habitual lifestyle and engage in unconventional living. Chris McCandless was a smart but tortured youth.
The unconventional side of Chris McCandless appeared in high school when he became captain of the cross-country team, the Road Warriors.
They just go off on these suicide treks. The whole point was to get lost.
They'd run out, get lost, find their bearings, run a little slower till I found their bearings, then run home again at full speed. One of his teammates said this was in effect how Chris led his whole life.
He was unhappy with society and his abusive parents, and he decided to divorce from them, as he put it.
But he refused to be part of the charade. We went to church and sat in the Sunday school class that our parents taught and listened to them tell our friends stories about God and to trust in Him. But when we got back home, behind closed doors, we were told that our Father was God, and that meant nothing that He did could be wrong. Our mother, usually through tears after being released by our Father, told us that she'd been trapped when she became pregnant with Chris. We understood that she was suffering because of our existence. Chris was 3 years older than me, so he grew up every day with a lot of guilt in his young life. That's a lot of pressure to put on the shoulders of a little boy.
And she went back and brought out these letters that Chris had written to her. Not after he dropped off the map, but beforehand as they were growing up. And she'd never shown them to anyone. They were harrowing. They described this abuse in this family that was absolutely horrifying. Emotional, physical, you name it. Really, really messed up family. And, you know, this stuff explained explicitly why Chris, as he put it, divorced himself from his family and wanted nothing more to do with them and didn't, you know, a lot of the blowback was, how could Chris do this to his family, this loving family? And they did love him in their unfortunate way. There was a lot of love. I mean, family love is often pathological, and this was a prime example.
He speaks of the ills of modernity, the superficiality of American materialism, the joys in nature and solitude, and the detriments of greed and ambition. Chris eventually decided to embark on a grand Alaskan adventure, a solo quest that would kill the false spiritual being within, as he put it. But ultimately, Chris went into the wild, ill-prepared and misintentioned. Chris was dead set on living off the land and ignored reasonable advice from people who just cared about his safety. Quote, Krakauer recounts several seasoned outdoorsmen offering McCandless specific advice on the gear needed to hunt, camp, and travel in the springtime tundra. Yet, arriving at the head of the Stampede Trail, McCandless possessed only a collapsible fishing rod, a few field guides, a bag of rice, and a 22-gauge rifle. The heavy-duty boots he wore had been forced upon him by the driver of his last ride, Jim Gallion, whose generous offers and sage counsels McCandless repeatedly scorned. As Krakauer put it in Into the Wild, quote, "It's easy when you are young to believe that what you desire is no less than what you would deserve. to assume that if you want something badly enough, it is your God-given right to have it. Krakauer relates Chris's journey in Alaska to his own when he solo climbed the Devil's Thumb.
When I was 23, I was young and reckless and did a similarly stupid trip in Alaska, a very serious climb, major solo expedition on the Stikine ice cap to climb a mountain called the Devil's Thumb, and I was very lucky. I survived. If I hadn't, people would have said of me, as they now say of Chris, that I had a death wish, and I know I didn't. And some people say he was out to kill himself, and I feel strongly that he wasn't. I mean,
What was your wish?
Same thing. It's hard to articulate because it defies logic. I thought if I picked a challenge that was hard enough and succeeded, everything thereafter would be all right. I mean, it makes no sense, but I was convinced of this. And it was not that I would get rich, it was just in some spiritual sense that you would feel so good after doing something this hard that, there's a long tradition of people who've done this. John Muir did that over and over again throughout his life. People think of Muir as this staid founder of the Sierra Club, a conservationist, but he was a wild man in his youth. He was always doing reckless things, climbing to the edge of waterfalls, climbing peaks. He writes repeatedly of almost dying. He liked to climb 100-foot Douglas fir trees in gales and ride out, swaying back and forth. I think there's there's something going on here. It's almost a classic rite of passage that we have in our culture and through history. Many cultures have had these, where risk-taking is something young men and sometimes young women feel they must do, are compelled to do, and it takes many forms, whether it's driving too fast or drinking too much or going to the wilderness. It's why it's so easy for armies to draft young men to go to war. It's this population group that likes the idea of taking risks and proving their manhood.
Hey, thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you're enjoying so far. If you enjoy the video, I do hope you'll consider subscribing. I'm actually in Hong Kong right now. I moved here for the next 9 months. So if you want to hear more about that, stick around until the end of the video. Anyways, leave a like, leave a comment, let me know what you think, and enjoy the rest of the video. I think that if Chris had been more open-minded, had considered what he was doing with more critical thought, he may have a more profound and lasting solution to his problems. Still, it's hard not for me to have a little bit of respect for his foolhardy insistence on rejecting modernity and embracing nature. It seems that in the weeks before his death, Chris came to realize the error in his ways. He was starving, lonely, and trapped. The tragedy is if he had not thrown caution to the wind and simply brought a map, he would know that 1/2 mile upstream there was a cable car he could have used to cross the impassable river. But he wanted to up the stakes to make the danger real, so he intentionally left his map behind. Krakauer emphasizes that if you set aside his poor preparations, once he was in this predicament, Chris indeed acted wisely. He retreated back to his shelter to wait for the river's swell to die down. But what did him in was eating the seeds of a plant that he had been eating the flesh of all summer, not knowing that the seeds were poisonous. Towards the end of his life, scared and alone, Chris highlighted an illuminating passage from Boris Pasternak's Dr. Zhivago. And so it turned out that only a life similar to the life of those around us, merging with it without a ripple, is a genuine life, and that an unshared happiness is not happiness. In the margins next to this package, Chris wrote, quote, "Happiness only real when shared." This quote stands in stark contrast to an earlier quote from Chris. "You are wrong if you think joy emanates only or principally from human relationships. God has placed it all around us. It is in everything and anything we might experience. We just have to have the courage to turn against our habitual lifestyle and engage in unconventional living." I believe there are elements of truth in both these stances. Personally, I have found immense joy in nature and solitude. 3 years ago, I quit my corporate job and went on a 3-month road trip across the U.S., visiting national parks, forests, rivers, oceans, mountains, that sort of thing. My mental health had been at an all-time low, having been dealing with debilitating chronic pain for the better part of 2 years, leading me to retreat into myself into my suffering like a turtle retreats into its shell. The chronic pain I bring up and have talked about on this channel before was the result of the same risk-seeking attitude and a similar bulletproof arrogance as Timothy Treadwell and Chris McCandless. My point is, we are all arrogant to one extent or another. That's why I titled this video, The Grizzly Arrogance of Man. But all these stories, mine included, are cautionary tales of what happens when you play with fire, when you throw caution to the wind simply to feel powerful, when you give in to the ego need to dominate, when you seek risk as a solution to your problems rather than addressing them head on. Chris McCandless said that it takes courage to turn against your habitual lifestyle and engage in unconventional living. These are wise words to me, which I'll talk about more in part 4. But I think it also takes courage to meet your problems and truly heal. I was on the road for 3 months, and while it was a turning point in my life, the real healing began 6 months prior when I started therapy for the first time in my life. I experienced profound joy on this trip. So I do agree with Chris when he said that there is joy all around us. But an important distinction here is that I was never really severed from humankind. I talked to my family and friends weekly on the trip, and I also visited friends in Washington, Colorado, Minnesota, and California. All this is to say, my story and the stories of Tim Treadwell and Chris McCandless are really not all that similar. I bring up my story to show you that Tim and Chris were short-sighted in their rejection of humanity in favor of wilderness. Even Henry David Thoreau was never more than a 30-minute walk from civilization, and he saw his family weekly, including his mother and sister who did his laundry and brought him meals. But this fact doesn't make Thoreau's meditations on nature any less profound.
Quote, "Time is but the stream I go a-fishing in. I drink at it, but while I drink, I see the sandy bottom and detect how shallow it is. Its thin current slides away, but eternity remains. I would drink deeper, fish in the sky whose bottom is pebbly with stars." However mean your life is, meet it and live it. Do not shun it and call it hard names. The fault finder will find faults even in paradise. Love your life, poor as it is. You may perhaps have some pleasant, thrilling, glorious hours, even in the poorhouse. The setting sun is reflected from the windows of the almshouse as brightly as from a rich man's abode. The snow melts before its doors as early in the spring. This second quote especially must have gone over Chris McCandless's head, who had a copy of Walden in his infamous bus. Nothing is achieved by running from your problems, whatever they may be. Life is hard and rife with suffering. And I think the reason Chris's story has resonated so widely is that many of us have similar fantasies of leaving the world behind and escaping into nature. But while you may escape civilization, you can never escape your own mind, and you can never escape the absurdity of existence.
So if Werner Herzog's callousness, Timothy Treadwell's quixotic naturalism, and Chris McCandless's hubris are flawed ways of engaging with nature, what is the right way? Well, I'm just a guy, and I don't claim to know the right way of doing anything. But I can tell you the philosophy that I've formed over my 28 years and how it's brought me fulfillment. It begins with respect. Living in Denver until a week ago, more on that later, this is one of the things that sort of driven me up the wall. I was very fortunate to live within 15 minutes of one of the most beautiful mountain ranges in the world. But all too often, I was reminded of humans stamping their presence on it.
Trash left on trails or at campsites, broken glass bottles, initials carved into aspen trees, people generally acting like nature is there for them. It might not seem like something to make a big fuss of, but to me, it's only one reflection of human arrogance, how we all act in accordance with domination and desire, rather than nature and harmony. In the words of George Perkins Marsh, quote, "We can never know how wide a circle of disturbance we produce in the harmonies of nature when we throw the smallest pebble in the ocean of organic life."
We'll see in part 2 how failing to respect nature leads not only to its subjugation, but the exploitation of people and culture as well. It all ties back to those pesky colonial and humanist ideals that have shaped our global society for centuries, and quite possibly well before that.
Alexander von Humboldt, a naturalist in the time of colonialism, was the first to relate colonialism to the devastation of the environment. Again and again, his thoughts return to nature as a complex web, but also to man's place within it. He prophetically observed the oncoming disaster from deforestation, water mismanagement, and pollution far before it was ever taken seriously. To quote The Invention of Nature, Andrea Wolf's biography of Humboldt, he debated nature, ecological issues, imperial power, and politics in relation to each other. He criticized unjust land distribution, monocultures, violence against tribal groups, and indigenous work conditions. All powerfully relevant issues today. Reading The Invention of Nature last year was an enlightening and depressing experience. Depressing because these predictions were made by a hugely popular and respected scientist in the year 1800, yet they were swept under the rug and otherwise ignored by those in power, those who profited too much off colonialism, capitalism, and ecological exploitation. This fact is too much to bear at times. Nothing has gotten better. The issues described by Humboldt, the issues that got us into this ecological nightmare, are the same issues we still face. The same issues politicians and elites talk about fixing, yet never fix. Because the incessant need for growth and profit is stronger than their empty declarations to heal the world.
If you're expecting some grand conclusion that there is a solution out there, some way of engaging with politics to enact real change, some radical and revolutionary political ideology that's going to solve all our problems, I'm sorry to say you'll be disappointed. I am something of a pessimist these days. Yes, I worry about the state of the world and humanity's collective future, as we all should. But I've come to realize that it's useless to waste time being anxious and overwhelmed by these things. There exists too much beauty in the world,
too many joyful faces, too many rich and vibrant cultures, too many wondrous sights to see. Rather than being angry at the world, I am gracious that I get to live in a time when I can still enjoy it, when I can travel and be in nature, when I can live unconventionally, when I can find freedom in revolution within myself and within my society. I am gracious that I have more books to read than I could read in a lifetime. I'm gracious that I get to interact with people that are different from me, to learn about them and from them. Friedrich Nietzsche has a famous concept called the eternal recurrence. In his words from The Gay Science, picture this, quote, "What if some day or night a demon were to steal after you into your loneliest loneliness and say to you, 'This life, as you now live it and have lived it, you will have to live once more and innumerable times more. And there will be nothing new in it, but every pain and every joy, and every thought and sigh, and everything unutterably small or great in your life will have to return to you, all in the same succession and sequence. Even this spider and this moonlight between the trees, and even this moment in I myself, the eternal hourglass of existence is turned upside down again and again, and you with it, speck of dust. Would you not throw yourself down and gnash your teeth and curse the demon who spoke thus? Or have you once experienced a tremendous moment when you would have answered him, 'You are a god and never have I heard anything more divine'? If this thought gained possession of you, it would change you as you are, or perhaps crush you. The question in each and everything, do you desire this once more and innumerable times more, would lie upon your actions as the greatest weight. Or how well disposed would you have to become to yourself and to your life?
What Nietzsche is getting at here is profound in its simplicity. If you had to live your life over and over and over again through eternity, what choices would you make? Would you continue on in a career that you hate? Or would you take risks and challenge yourself and try something new that will hopefully bring you fulfillment? Would you settle into a comfortable routine? Or would you experience the world in all its complex beauty? Would you spend your time placating the mind with reality TV? Or would you expand your worldview and challenge your thoughts?
What happens when you live your life in the same safe, pre-planned ways so many people play music when they pick up an instrument? What happens is your life becomes a blocked rhizome. The possibility of a random root shooting off and making a new, exciting connection with another network becomes impossible. The possibility of playing new music with your life becomes impossible. You turn yourself into a tree, rooted in one place, restricted to the same riffs and transitions for the rest of your life, unable to see new possibilities. But this is what so many people do to Deleuze. They want an identity given to them by some third party outside of them that tells them how to live. A city planner for their own identity, someone to answer the question for them, what does it mean to be me? This is why it's so common for people to want answers to these old questions from philosophy that we began the series with. People desperately want an answer to the question, how should one live? How should one act? As though being a human being could ever be marginalized to questions that simple. As though there is some sort of human nature out there, some constant of the universe, some essence, or if only the right philosopher comes along and identifies it for us, then I'll have all the answers. Then we can rest easy knowing that some transcendent body prescribed a way that I should be.
Now, I know that the world is set up in its current form to make that first option more appealing. At the end of a long day of work, it's completely understandable to just want to throw on the TV and turn off your mind for a little bit. So I'm not trying to prescribe anything to your specific situation because I don't know you and I don't know what works for you. However, this is just what I have found in my own personal experience. As part of my mission to live differently, and yes, I know that sounds kind of pretentious, but I can't really think of a better way of putting it. I have moved to Hong Kong. I am actually here right now and just completed my first week of orientation for a program where I'm going to be teaching secondary school students English. I'm recording this in my hotel room right now. Isn't that beautiful? I can show you the view though, which is actually quite nice. There's a typhoon happening right now. That's why there's all these storm clouds. After graduation, I tried my hand in the corporate marketing world and then the nonprofit marketing world, and I decided that they were both not for me. This feels a lot more my speed, and it's not glamorous. My salary is a fraction of what it was before, but you know, who gives a fuck? I think it can be very easy to sort of stay in your bubble and your comfort zone, and I totally understand that, but because that's kind of what I was doing up until recently. I got laid off like 3 months ago, and I decided to do this, and I think it's for the best.
To truly affirm existence is to seek difference, while also understanding that there is no cookie-cutter template of identity to follow as a human being, and ultimately to accept the fact that when it comes down to it, the universe doesn't owe you anything. There are no guarantees. To affirm life and to truly embrace immanence and a world in motion is to accept that the universe is going to play out the way it's going to play out, and to get attached to any single outcome, good or bad, is simply to deny the way that reality is unfolding. Now, Deleuze is not saying that you shouldn't try because of that, or you should resign yourself to total acceptance of whatever comes your way. Try your hardest, have a plan, stay in motion, but understand and find peace with the fact that you can't ever really know ahead of time where that motion is going to take you. For this reason, Deleuze is a really big fan of looking at life almost as a series of experiments, because an experiment is always in some way seeking something new, but you can't ever know the result of the experiment until you actually run the experiment. This is a worldview that can start to sound a lot like Nietzsche, and it's no coincidence that both Nietzsche and Deleuze talk about this process of living by affirming life rather than negating life. But maybe if there's one thing both Nietzsche and Deleuze are the most similar on, it's the fact that they both absolutely despise conformity. And the idea that the person who stays in motion, embraces difference, creates their own values and identity, makes connections, experiments. The idea that this is the person that owes the world an explanation for their actions, rather than the person conforming to the safety of the systems of thought around them. This person to them will often spend their entire lives never seeing enough of the rhizome to even know how small of a vine they're conforming to.
I'm making this decision for a variety of reasons, and I'm not going to spend the time going through all of them, but I can give you the broad strokes. First and foremost, like I said, I am coming here with the idea of experiencing life and experiencing the world in a more real, full sense. I've always had sort of an adventurous spirit, and I finally feel like it's the point in my life where I don't really have a plan for the future. More people need to be honest about that, because I think a lot of us don't have real plans for the future. We might have a career trajectory that we're aiming for, but I'm not really one to stress about that sort of thing. It's giving me the opportunity to travel the world. I've never been to Asia before, so I really feel immensely grateful for the opportunity. I also feel drawn to learning more about Eastern culture and Eastern religion. I've been practicing meditation for a long time. You might have picked up on that from some of my other videos. The times that I felt most at peace are when I don't have much of a plan and I'm kind of just winging it. Go with the river's flow, as the Taoism master spoke of earlier.
Go with flow.
I'm hoping to live a life of quote-unquote voluntary simplicity. I got that from a book by Jon Kabat-Zinn, which he talks about here.
I like to practice voluntary simplicity to counter such impulses and make sure nourishment comes at a deeper level. It involves intentionally doing only one thing at a time and making sure that I'm here for it. Many occasions present themselves, taking a walk, for instance. Voluntary simplicity means going fewer places in one day rather than more, seeing less so I can see more, doing less so I can do more, acquiring less so I can have more.
So to wrap up my final thoughts and answer my own question of how to engage with nature and the world, allow me these final words. It is enough to simply be in nature. Have a bonfire, hike a trail, climb a wall, raft a river, ride a bike. It doesn't really matter what you do. It only matters how you do it. Embrace this absurd existence, what little time we have on this beautiful planet, because it is a gift. Quote, "The world is a sacred vessel that cannot be changed. He who changes it will destroy it. He who seizes it will lose it." I know as well as anyone how hard it can be to grapple with the world that we live in, but I honestly believe that the best way to make a difference is to treat others with empathy and treat the universe as sacred. Just as a butterfly's wings have a profound and unknowable impact on the beings it touches, just as a pebble cast into a lake sends ripples through eternity, so too do your actions. All right, thank you again, everybody who stuck around until the end. Make sure you subscribe. Let me know what you think in the comments. I hope that this was enjoyable as it was for you, as it was for me. Wait, that doesn't make sense. I hope this was as enjoyable for you as it was for me to make. It might be a bit of an erratic schedule going forward for me, for the reasons I've already mentioned. But I'm gonna do my best to keep bringing you guys good content. By the way, hey, we hit 2,000 subscribers since the last video, so I think that's gonna do it. Peace and love, and I'll see you next time.